Legacy of Love 10. Years after Maria Santos first arrived at the Henderson estate, her story had become an integral part of Millbrook's identity. What began as a tragic mystery had evolved into a powerful testament to human compassion and community strength. The Maria Santos Memorial Trail, created along the path she had walked on her final evening, served as both a remembrance of her life and a reminder of the importance of safety in the wilderness. Sarah Henderson, now a college student studying social work, had written her senior thesis on the experiences of immigrant domestic workers in America. Inspired by Maria's story and the stories of other women she had met through the foundation work, her research revealed the isolation and vulnerability that many of these workers faced, far from their families and often lacking strong support networks. Sarah's work led to the establishment of support groups and resource centers in several neighboring communities. Timothy Henderson had followed through on his commitment to search and rescue work, becoming certified as an emergency medical technician and joining the county's volunteer rescue squad. On quiet weekends, he would often hike the trails where Maria had walked, ensuring that the safety equipment was properly maintained and helping lost or injured hikers find their way to safety. His dedication had already saved several lives, and he frequently spoke at community events about wilderness preparedness. The Henderson family had never hired another live-in domestic worker after Maria's death, choosing instead to manage their household duties themselves and hire local cleaning services as needed. Eleanor Henderson often said that no one could ever replace Maria's warmth and caring presence. The room that had once been Maria's was converted into a library and study space, decorated with photos of Maria and mementos from the Philippines that her family had shared with the Hendersons. Sergeant Morrison, now nearing retirement, considered Maria's case one of the most significant of his career, not because of its complexity, but because of its impact on the community and his own understanding of loss and healing. He had stayed in touch with Maria's family in the Philippines, visiting them twice more over the years and helping to facilitate ongoing educational exchanges between Millbrook students and schools in Maria's home village. The investigation into Maria's disappearance had also led to important changes in how missing person cases were handled in the region. The police department had implemented new protocols for search operations in wooded areas, including specialized training for officers in recognizing hidden terrain features that could trap victims. The case study of Maria's disappearance was now used in training programs for search and rescue teams across the state. Rosa Delgado had become an advocate for immigrant workers' rights, using Maria's story to highlight the importance of community support networks for people working far from home. She had helped establish a buddy system among domestic workers in the area, ensuring that no one would venture out alone without someone knowing their plans and expected return time. This simple system had already prevented several potential accidents and had helped reunite lost hikers with their worried families. The annual Memorial Day gathering at Maria's memorial site had grown into a significant community event that brought together people from diverse backgrounds to celebrate both Maria's life and the values of compassion and mutual support that her story had inspired. Families would bring picnic lunches and children would play games while adults shared stories and renewed their commitments to helping others in their community. Agent Patricia Walsh from the FBI had used the lessons learned from Maria's case to improve protocols for distinguishing between missing person cases that might involve foul play and those that might be accidents or voluntary disappearances. The thorough investigation, while ultimately revealing a tragic accident rather than a crime, had been valuable in developing more efficient and comprehensive approaches to missing person investigations. The Vider scholarship program established in Maria's name had already helped dozens of students in her home village complete their education, with several going on to attend college and pursue careers that would have been impossible without this assistance. Maria's youngest sister, who had been only 8 when Maria disappeared, was now studying nursing with the hope of returning to help her community's healthcare needs. Dr. Chen, the medical examiner, had been so moved by her involvement in Maria's case that she had established a program to provide free forensic services for families of missing persons who might not otherwise be able to afford thorough investigations. Her work had helped solve several other cold cases and had brought closure to many families who had been left wondering about their loved ones' fates as Millbrook prepared to mark the 10th anniversary of Maria's disappearance in 2003. The town had been fundamentally changed by her brief presence and lasting impact. What had begun as the story of a young woman seeking a better life in a foreign country had become a lasting lesson about the connections that bind communities together and the responsibility everyone shares for the well-being of others. Maria Santos had come to America with dreams of helping her family and building a better future. Though her life was cut tragically short, her legacy continued to touch lives and inspire positive change years after her death. In the end, the young maid who had disappeared on a forest trail had found a different kind of immortality, one built on love, memory, and the determination of those she left behind to honor her life by serving others. The truth revealed the weeks following the discovery of Maria's remains brought a mixture of closure and profound sadness to everyone who had known and loved. Her Dr. Chen's final autopsy report painted a clearer picture of Maria's final moments, though the details were difficult for her loved ones to hear. The forensic evidence suggested that Maria had survived the initial fall but had suffered severe injuries that prevented her from climbing out of the ravine or calling for help effectively. Sergeant Morrison worked with Forest Service experts to reconstruct the events of that October night in 1993. They determined that Maria had been following a deer trail that she had likely used before on her evening walks. The path seemed safe and well-worn, but it led directly to the hidden ravine that had been carved out by decades of water erosion. In the fading light of dusk and possibly distracted by her thoughts about her family's troubles back home, Maria had simply stepped into what appeared to be solid ground. The investigation team also discovered that Maria had not been completely alone in her final hours. Deep scratches on a nearby tree suggested she had tried desperately to pull herself up, using the roots and branches that hung down into the ravine. Traces of fabric caught on thorns indicated multiple attempts to find a way out of her predicament. The thought of Maria's brave struggle for survival was both inspiring and heartbreaking for those who had known her gentle nature. Eleanor Henderson requested to visit the site where Maria had been found. Despite her family's concerns about her fragile emotional state, accompanied by Sergeant Morrison and a grief counselor, she made the difficult journey into the woods. Standing at the edge of the ravine where Maria had fallen, Eleanor placed a bouquet of white roses and spoke softly in both English and the few Tagalog phrases Maria had taught her years earlier. The community's response to the discovery was overwhelming. Local artists created a memorial garden near the trailhead where Maria had begun her final walk. The Henderson Foundation, which had been established to help missing immigrants, expanded its mission to include trail safety education and support for families of accident victims. Sarah Henderson, now 17, wrote a moving essay about Maria's impact on her life that was published in the local newspaper and later reprinted in national publications. Timothy Henderson, who had spent years studying criminology in hopes of solving Maria's case, found himself redirecting his interest toward forest safety and emergency rescue operations. He began volunteering with local search and rescue teams, driven by the knowledge that better trail marking and emergency response protocols might have saved Maria's life. The discovery also brought unexpected connections with Maria's family in the Philippines. With the case finally closed, they were able to make arrangements to bring Maria's remains home for a proper burial, according to their traditions. The Henderson family contributed significantly to these arrangements and also established a scholarship fund at the local school in Maria's home village, ensuring that her younger siblings could continue their education. Rosa Delgado, Maria's closest friend among the domestic workers, organized a memorial service that brought together people from all walks of life who had been touched by Maria's story. Domestic workers from across the region attended, along with members of the Filipino-American community, local residents who had participated in the search efforts, and law enforcement officers who had worked on the case. The service was conducted in both English and Tagalog, honoring Maria's heritage while acknowledging the American community that had embraced her. During the memorial service, many people shared stories about Maria that revealed the depth of her character and the breadth of her impact on others. Her former employer at a flower shop she had worked at part-time spoke about Maria's gentle way with the elderly customers and her talent for creating beautiful arrangements. A local librarian remembered how Maria would spend her free time reading children's books to improve her English, often helping other immigrants who were struggling with the language. The revelation that Maria's death had been an accident rather than a crime brought some measure of peace to those who had loved her, but it also raised troubling questions about the safety of the trail system in the area. Local authorities worked with state park services to install better lighting and safety barriers along popular walking trails. Warning signs were posted near areas where the terrain could be dangerous, and emergency call boxes were installed at regular intervals throughout the forest. Dr. Chen, the medical examiner who had handled Maria's remains with such care and respect, was deeply moved by the community's response to the case. She began working with local schools to teach young people about forest safety and the importance of informing others about their plans when venturing into wilderness areas alone. Her presentations always included Maria's story as a cautionary tale that honored the young woman's memory, while potentially preventing similar tragedies. As autumn returned to Millbrook in 1998, 5 years after Maria's disappearance, the community had been forever changed by both her presence and her loss. The annual memorial walk organized in her honor attracted hundreds of participants, raising funds for immigrant assistance programs and trail safety initiatives. The discovery spring of 1998 brought an unusually dry season to Millbrook, and by May, local authorities had issued several warnings about increased fire danger in the wooded areas surrounding the town. It was during this time that the State Parks Department decided to create new fire breaks throughout the forest system, cutting narrow paths through dense undergrowth to help prevent the spread of potential wildfires. On the morning of May 15, 1998, almost 5 years to the day after Maria Santos had disappeared, a Parks Department crew was working on a fire break about 3 miles from the Henderson estate. The team leader, a gruff but experienced outdoorsman named Frank Kowalski, was operating a brush cutter when his machine suddenly jammed. Upon investigation, he discovered that the blade had caught on something metallic, buried beneath years of fallen leaves and forest debris. As Frank cleared away the organic matter, his breath caught in his throat. Partially buried and covered with rust was a small silver locket on a delicate chain. The piece of jewelry seemed out of place in the remote wilderness, and something about it made Frank's stomach turn. He called for his crew to stop working and immediately contacted his supervisor, who in turn called the police. Detective Morrison, now Sergeant Morrison, arrived at the scene within the hour. The moment he saw the locket, he felt a chill run down his spine. He had seen similar jewelry in the photos of Maria's belongings that the Henderson family had provided during the original investigation. With trembling hands, he carefully bagged the evidence and called for the county's forensic team to thoroughly examine the area. What the forensic team discovered over the following days would haunt everyone involved for years to come. Beneath several inches of decomposed leaves and forest floor material, they uncovered the partial skeletal remains of a young woman. The bones were scattered over a small area, consistent with natural scavenging by wildlife over several years. Mixed with the remains were fragments of clothing that matched the description of what Maria had been wearing on the night she disappeared. The medical examiner, Dr. Patricia Chen, handled the delicate process of examining the remains with the respect and care due to any victim. Initial analysis confirmed that the bones belonged to a young Asian woman, approximately 5 feet 2 inches tall, consistent with Maria's physical description. Dental records provided by Maria's family in the Philippines would later confirm what everyone already suspected. They had found Maria Santos. The discovery sent shockwaves through Millbrook and beyond. The Henderson family, who had clung to hope for almost 5 years, were devastated but also relieved to finally have answers. Eleanor Henderson collapsed upon hearing the news and had to be hospitalized for exhaustion and grief. The children, now teenagers, struggled to process the reality that their beloved Maria was truly gone and had been lying in the forest all these years, so close to where they lived. Dr. Chen's detailed examination of the remains revealed crucial information about Maria's final hours. The position and condition of the bones, along with examination of the surrounding area, indicated that Maria had died from a fall down a steep ravine that was hidden by dense vegetation. The ravine was approximately 20 feet deep and lined with jagged rocks. In the darkness of an October evening, it would have been nearly impossible to see until it was too late. This discovery explained why the search dogs had lost Maria's scent trail years earlier. She had likely fallen into the ravine early in her walk, and her scent had been trapped in the depression below ground level. The search teams had passed within 50 yards of her location multiple times during the original investigation, but the thick undergrowth and the depth of the ravine had concealed the tragedy from view. Further investigation of the site revealed personal items scattered throughout the ravine. Maria's small purse, containing her rosary and a photo of her family back home, her house key, and most heartbreakingly, a small wrapped package that appeared to be the guitar picks she had purchased as part of her surprise gift for Sarah Henderson. The package was still partially intact after nearly 5 years, protected by the plastic bag Maria had wrapped it in. The revelation that Maria's disappearance had been a tragic accident rather than foul play brought mixed emotions to everyone who had been involved in the search. While it provided closure and answered the haunting questions that had plagued the community, it also brought the painful realization that Maria had died alone and afraid, calling out for help that never came because no one knew where to look. Agent Walsh from the FBI felt particularly conflicted about the discovery. The extensive investigation into human trafficking had led to important arrests and the rescue of other victims, but it had also diverted resources and attention from the simpler, more tragic truth of Maria's fate. The agent made a personal commitment to ensure that Maria's story would be remembered and that her death would not be in vain. Years of silence. As 1994 turned into 1995 and then 1996, Maria Santos seemed to fade from public memory like morning mist. The Henderson family never stopped hoping, but life had to continue. Mrs. Henderson hired another domestic worker, an older woman named Grace from Ireland, but the family often remarked that the house never felt quite the same. Sarah Henderson, now a teenager, kept Maria's favorite book of Filipino folktales on her nightstand, reading from it whenever she missed her former caregiver. Detective Morrison had been promoted to sergeant by 1996, but he never forgot about Maria's case. Her file remained on his desk, growing thicker with dead-end leads and false hopes. Every few months, someone would call in claiming to have seen a young Filipino woman matching Maria's description. But these sightings always proved to be mistaken identity. The detective had visited the Philippines twice at his own expense, hoping to uncover some clue about Maria's past that might explain her disappearance. During his investigation in Maria's home village, Morrison learned disturbing details about her family's desperate financial situation. Her father's illness had worsened, and medical bills had pushed the family to the brink of poverty. Maria's younger siblings had been forced to drop out of school to work in the rice fields. The detective wondered if this knowledge might have driven Maria to desperate measures. But still, no evidence supported any theory about what had actually happened to her. The case took an unexpected turn in late 1996, when Detective Morrison received a call from the FBI. Agent Patricia Walsh explained that they were investigating a human trafficking ring that had been operating throughout the northeastern United States. Several young women, mostly immigrants working as domestic help, had disappeared under similar circumstances over the past 5 years. The patterns were eerily familiar. Young women who vanished during evening walks, scent trails that mysteriously ended, and families left with no answers. This revelation brought both hope and horror to the Henderson family. The possibility that Maria might still be alive somewhere gave them renewed energy to continue searching, but the thought of what she might be enduring was almost too painful to bear. Agent Walsh warned them that trafficking victims were often moved, frequently, and held in conditions that made escape nearly impossible. The FBI investigation expanded the search for Maria from a local missing person case to part of a multi-state federal operation. Dozens of agents worked around the clock, following financial trails, interviewing known traffickers, and coordinating with international law enforcement agencies. For months, it seemed like they were on the verge of a breakthrough, but the criminal network proved to be more sophisticated and careful than initially believed. Meanwhile, the Henderson children were growing up with Maria's disappearance as a defining experience of their youth. Timothy, now 13, had become obsessed with criminology and spent hours reading about missing person cases online. Sarah, 15, volunteered at a local shelter for victims of domestic violence, driven by her desire to help vulnerable women like Maria. In Millbrook, Maria's story had become local legend. New residents would hear about the young maid who vanished in the woods, and the tale grew more mysterious with each telling. Some claimed the forest was haunted by her spirit, Others insisted she had been killed by a wild animal, though no evidence of animal attack had ever been found. The most optimistic believed she had simply run away to start a new life. But those who knew Maria personally dismissed this theory entirely. Rosa Delgado, Maria's closest friend among the domestic workers, never gave up hope of finding answers. She had kept all of Maria's personal belongings that weren't taken by police as evidence. In Maria's small collection of possessions, Rosa found a diary written in a mixture of English and Tagalog. The entries revealed Maria's homesickness and worry about her family, but also her genuine affection for the Hendersons and her plans for the future. The diary entries stopped abruptly 3 days before Maria disappeared. The final entry was particularly poignant, describing Maria's excitement about a surprise she was planning for Sarah's upcoming birthday. She had been secretly learning to play guitar so she could perform traditional Filipino songs for the girl she had come to love like a little sister. As 1997 approached, the case remained frustratingly unsolved. The FBI investigation had led to several arrests related to human trafficking, but none provided information about Maria's fate. The Henderson family had set up a foundation in Maria's name to help other missing immigrants, but they still longed for closure about what had happened to the young woman who had brought so much joy to their lives. Winter settled over Millbrook like a heavy blanket, and the woods where Maria had vanished stood silent and snow-covered, keeping their secrets locked away beneath the frozen ground. The search begins. The morning after Maria's disappearance brought a flurry of activity to the normally peaceful Henderson estate. Police cars lined the long driveway while officers set up a command center in the family's spacious garage. Detective James Morrison, a seasoned investigator with 20 years of experience, took charge of the case. He had handled missing person investigations before, but something about this particular case struck him as different from the start. The initial search focused on the immediate area where Maria was last seen. K-9 units picked up her scent near the edge of the woods but lost the trail after about half a mile, where it seemed to simply disappear. This puzzled the handlers, who were accustomed to their dogs following scent trails much further, especially in wooded areas where smells tend to linger longer. Detective Morrison interviewed each member of the Henderson family separately, following standard protocol. Mr. Robert Henderson, a successful real estate developer, appeared genuinely distraught about Maria's disappearance. He described her as an exemplary employee who had never caused any problems or shown signs of wanting to leave. Mrs. Henderson was barely able to speak through her tears, repeatedly expressing guilt about allowing Maria to walk alone in the woods. The children's testimonies were particularly heartbreaking. Young Timothy insisted that Maria would never leave without saying goodbye, while Sarah tearfully recounted how Maria had promised to teach her a Filipino lullaby that weekend. Their innocent faith that Maria would return home soon made the investigation all the more urgent for everyone involved. As word of Maria's disappearance spread through Millbrook, the tight-knit community rallied together in an impressive show of support. Local businesses donated food and supplies for the search volunteers. The high school football team canceled their practice to join the search efforts. Even people who had never met Maria felt compelled to help, moved by the story of the young woman who had traveled so far from home, only to vanish in their peaceful town. The search expanded day by day, covering an ever-widening area of forest land. Helicopters flew overhead in grid patterns while ground teams methodically combed through thick underbrush and rocky terrain. The autumn weather added another layer of difficulty to the search, as falling leaves obscured potential evidence and early morning frost made the ground slippery and dangerous for volunteers. Media attention soon followed, bringing reporters from regional newspapers and television stations to the small town. The story of the missing Filipino maid captured public interest, and soon tip lines were established to handle the influx of potential leads. Unfortunately, most of these tips led nowhere, sending search teams on wild chases that only served to drain resources and hope. But one particularly promising lead came from a truck driver who claimed to have seen a young Asian woman hitchhiking on the highway about 10 miles from Millbrook on the night Maria disappeared. However, when investigators checked traffic cameras and interviewed other drivers who had traveled that route, they could find no corroborating evidence to support this sighting. Maria's friends from the local domestic worker community were devastated by her disappearance. They organized their own search efforts on their days off, focusing on areas they knew Maria liked to visit. Rosa Delgado, who worked for a family 3 miles away, revealed that Maria had been receiving letters from home that seemed to upset her. The letters were written in Tagalog, and when translated, they revealed that Maria's father had fallen seriously ill and needed expensive medical treatment. This revelation added a new dimension to the investigation. Had Maria been planning to return home to help her family? Could she have left voluntarily without telling anyone? Detective Morrison explored this possibility thoroughly, checking bus stations, airports, and train terminals within a 100-mile radius. Immigration records showed no evidence of Maria attempting to leave the country, and her passport was still in her room at the Henderson house. As the weeks passed and leads grew cold, the intensive daily searches were scaled back to weekend volunteer efforts. The Henderson family refused to give up hope, posting flyers throughout the region and offering a substantial reward for information leading to Maria's safe return. The case remained active, but with no new evidence or credible sightings, it gradually faded from public attention, becoming another unsolved mystery in the files of the Millbrook Police Department. The vanishing Maria Santos was only 19 when she arrived at the Henderson family estate in the quiet town of Millbrook. The year was 1993, and she had traveled from her small village in the Philippines to work as a live-in maid for the wealthy American family. With her warm smile and gentle nature, Maria quickly became beloved by everyone in the household, especially the Henderson children, who saw her more as a caring older sister than hired help. The Henderson mansion sat on 15 acres of pristine land, surrounded by dense woods and rolling hills. Maria had her own small room on the second floor, overlooking the garden where she loved to sit during her breaks. She would often write letters to her family back home, describing the beautiful countryside and her dreams of saving enough money to bring her younger siblings to America for their education. Mrs. Eleanor Henderson, a sophisticated woman in her 50s, had hired Maria through an agency that specialized in placing international domestic workers. Eleanor was impressed by Maria's references and her eagerness to work hard. The young woman spoke decent English and showed remarkable dedication to her duties, often staying up late to ensure everything was perfect for the family's frequent dinner parties and social gatherings. Life seemed to settle into a comfortable routine for Maria. She would wake at dawn to prepare breakfast, spend her days cleaning and organizing the vast house, and help with the children's homework in the evenings. The Henderson children, 8-year-old Timothy and 12-year-old Sarah, adored her storytelling abilities and would beg her to share tales from her homeland during bedtime. However, beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect arrangement, there were subtle signs that all was not well. Maria had mentioned to fellow workers in the neighborhood that she sometimes felt lonely and homesick. She had made friends with other domestic workers in the area, meeting them at the local market on her days off. They formed a small, tight-knit community of young women far from home, supporting each other through the challenges of adapting to American life. The last time anyone saw Maria was on a crisp autumn evening in October 1993. She had finished her duties for the day and asked Mrs. Henderson for permission to take a walk in the woods behind the property. This was not unusual for Maria, who often enjoyed solitary walks to clear her mind and connect with nature. She promised to be back before dark, as was her custom. When Maria failed to return for dinner, the Henderson family initially wasn't alarmed. They assumed she might have lost track of time or perhaps visited one of her friends in town. But as the hours passed and darkness fell completely, concern began to grow. Mrs. Henderson tried calling the families where Maria's friends worked, but no one had seen her that day. By midnight, the worry had transformed into genuine fear. Mr. Henderson, a prominent businessman who was usually calm under pressure, found himself pacing the living room, while his wife made increasingly frantic phone calls. The children, sensing the adults' distress, couldn't sleep and kept asking when Maria would come home to read them their bedtime story. The decision to call the police came at 3 a.m. when a thorough search of the property and surrounding immediate area yielded no trace of Maria. When the officers arrived, they took detailed statements from the family and began what would become one of the most puzzling missing person cases in the county's history. The woods behind the Henderson estate stretched for miles, connecting to state forest land and several hiking trails used by locals and tourists alike. As dawn broke on what would be the first of many difficult days ahead, search teams began combing through the forest. Volunteers from the community joined police officers and trained search dogs in looking for any sign of the missing young woman. The search would continue for weeks, expanding to cover hundreds of acres of wilderness. But Maria Santos had seemingly vanished without a trace, leaving behind only questions and a heartbroken family who had grown to love her as one of their own.